All right, everyone, we are hitting the home stretch. So let's review. So far, we took a look on how to set up a Supabase account, set up a workspace, set up projects, how to configure a database that is hosted by Supabase, how to use it with PSQL, how to use it with a basic Flask app, how to interact with the SQL editor here, with the database here, how to seed some data in it, and grab connection strings, whatnot. Now, what we want to do is take this project, which is running on localhost 5000. It's already connected to our hosted database, but it's still running on localhost 5000. So nobody can use it. Well, I can use it, but I want everybody to use it because it's awesome and it's going to make $1 billion. So I need to deploy it, and I will deploy it on render. Now, this is not the only option for deployment. There are many options for deployment, from very complicated ones to less complicated, such as render. We are choosing render for a couple of reasons. One big reason is that they have a free tier, meaning you don't have to pay anything. You can practice in deploying projects and you pay nothing. That's very, very good. The second reason is that it abstracts a lot of the settings, very difficult settings about deployment that you would have to configure if, let's say, you were buying or paying for a bare bones server, let's say from DigitalOcean. There you would get a blank either Windows or Linux server, and you would have to set up all the dependencies. Even before you moved over your application there would be hours and hours and hours of setting up, well, maybe not hours, but a good amount of time of setting up everything that you need for that application to run. Here, render will take care of most basic default settings for you, and then all you have to do is provide the application and some of the application settings, and it will deploy for you. Good. All right, so what do we have to do first? Obviously, first we need to register for render. Just like with Supabase, there are a couple ways to do it. You can use your GitHub account, you can use your Google account, or you can just register with a email and the password, and then you will be taken to the dashboard. At dashboard, you will have your active projects. Here we don't have any active projects because I didn't create any yet. Well, I do, but for learning purposes, this is going to be blank. So let's set up a new active project and migrate this app to render so that will be deployed on render and everybody can use it. I will click new and I will select a new web service. A new web service is a general container for any application, whether it be a Node or Python or other programming languages. So we'll select that. Now, the next thing that we have to do is connect our GitHub repository. So we'll do that. Now, I believe I reset it, so I'll go and configure the account. When you go into your GitHub, it might ask you to sign in first, but for me, it went immediately to it. It will ask a couple questions. Do you want to give render access to all of your repositories or only selected repositories? Makes sense to only give access to selected repositories. You can choose one or more than one, it's up to you. So for now, I will select our Foodie app. So we will get that, and we'll get the Foodie Supabase example app. Great. Then we have that. Read access, read and write and whatnot. Basically, render can grab your repository, clone it, and read from it. Good. Let's install. This will take a few seconds. Nothing too. And now we can connect this particular repository. Great. Let's connect that. And now render will give you a couple of options. So this is going to be a name for your repository. You can change it. I will keep it as is. Region, very similar to what we had at Supabase when we were selecting that. It will pick the region that's closest to you and it's most efficient to you. You can pick any other region. It's really up to you. Usually leave it at default. It's better that way. Branch. This is the branch that render will access to pull your latest code. Main makes sense because usually your latest code will be on the main branch for this specific repository, but if you want to use another branch, you can select it here. Root directory. If you have a different root directory than the default of your project, so let's say if this case, this is a Flask app, if I had it within a different root directory, then I would specify a different root directory here. Generally, if you're just following the defaults, you don't need to mess with these things here. This will be fine. So we'll leave it as that. Runtime. Well, this is the language that we're selecting. This is a Python app, so we'll leave it at Python 3. If we were using any other language, well, this is where we select that. We can also specify Python versions in the env files. Build command. This is what render runs to build all of your dependencies. Should be very familiar. You need to have a requirements.txt file. It will install it. It'll install from requirements.txt, and then your app will be ready to run. Start command. This is where it's a little bit different. Now, when we run the Flask app locally, let's close this out and run it again. We run it with Flask run. This takes a second, needs to connect to Supabase. Now, here Flask gives us a warning. This is a development server. Do not use it in a production deployment. Use a production WSGI server instead. What does this cryptic message mean? Flask is telling us that in development, Flask has its own server, basically for development purposes. This is not suitable for production. We need a different server to run our Flask application in production. So render by default uses GUnicorn. It's just another library, and we will need to include it in our project. So here I have in the requirements.txt included GUnicorn, and this is the version. This is the staple version which I included. You can look it up on pip, and as long as it's a recent stable version, this will be fine. Make sure that this is in your requirements.txt because render will be looking for it to run your Flask application. Okay, good. And this command, app, or actually app, app. This command says, okay, run app and look for the app file. Now, my file is actually called app.py. If it was called server.py, I would have it running app server. If it was called Yuri.py, I would have it run app Yuri. Don't name your application Yuri. It's an awesome name, bad name for an application. Okay, and then we will select an instance type. By default, it selects you for the starter, $7 a month. We don't need that. We are completely fine with the free version. It will give you a warning. Don't worry about the warning. Essentially, it says, okay, get paid plans to get more features. The only kind of caveat about a free plan is once your application deploys on the free plan, if it's inactive for a while, it essentially goes into a pause mode, meaning that let's say you deploy it, you use it now, and then tomorrow you try to use it again, it will take like a good 30 seconds to spin up again. So it might look like it's hanging, but once it spins up again, then it will be very responsive again. So that's essentially the only kind of like weird thing that you might run into with a free plan. If you don't use your application for like a day, the first time you use it the next day, it will take that good 30 seconds to spin up again. Okay, so we'll keep it at the free plan. Now, environment variables. This is very, very, very important. Here we have an env file locally, right? Again, for your eyes only. For your eyes only. So I have, let's see, a secret key, a database URL, and a Spoonacular API key. All of these need to also be within render because this is where it will get those for your eyes only passwords, API keys, usernames and whatnot. So let's transfer some of these things over here. So we'll get the secret key, and this is going to be the following. This is going to be a long process, but an important process. And add another one, and we will use the database URL. Okay. Now it has to be spelled correctly, and of course punctuation is very important. And now the database URL I want to connect to is now going to be my Supabase database URL. So let's grab that. And lastly, I need my Spoonacular API key. And that will be the following here. That will be the following thing here. Good. So assuming I put everything in correctly, that should be all fine. Free plan, GUnicorn, Python 3, closest server, whatnot, and we will click create web service. We'll create that, and we will go to the next page. Now, render now will reach out to my GitHub, grab my repository, and start building the project. So let's take a look here. It knows it's a Python project. It's running all the settings. It's running the requirements.txt. It's going to build everything up. And you know what? Unless you want to hear me talk for the next 5 minutes, we'll come back once it's all built up and we'll test it once render finishes this up. See you there.